This is the DRF Players Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the April 29th edition of the DRF Players Podcast. I'm host Peter Thomas Fornatale, back with you, joined by the regular podcast team of at DRF Formulator Mike Hogan and at UT Big Hair Jonathon Kinchen. Gentlemen, what's going on?
Well, I don't know. Just getting ready. We're only 8 days away from the Derby. I can feel it. It seems like every horse that's working is going to be the next Derby winner, and there's a lot of excitement going on. So,
Jonathon, I'm envisioning you in your office, holed up with many screens open, studying workouts, talking to your sources throughout the industry, and already formulating your Derby Day Pick 6 in an attempt to best the tremendous score you made last year. Does that sound about right?
Yeah, actually, that's extremely accurate. I was going to kind of lie a little bit and say that I was online shopping for my Derby outfit, but I've already done that. That's already been sorted out. So no need to get on any websites for that.
Was there a special visit made to Bucket Feet or whatever website that is where you get those crazy shoes?
No, I already got them ready to rock and roll. So there was no need, but I already got the shirts ready to rock. So we'll see. It should be good.
I expect a tweeted picture, please, at least one. So I was poking around online today. I don't mean to cause any panic among contest players, especially not you, Jonathon, but I did see that the Churchill official rules do for Derby Day eliminate two accessories that you're always rocking: the backpack, and the laptop. I would assume with whatever credential you have or whatever, you're not going to have a problem walking in there. Has this always been the way on Derby Day? Have you not been able to bring in a laptop in the past?
Yeah, normally I don't worry about it. I do all of my work before I get there because if I'm being honest with myself, I'm in no condition to be making any important decisions when I'm there. So usually I'll print my PPs and I'll just bring them with me and I'll have all of my work already done. I'll get on Ticketmaker. I'll make my pick 5 or pick 6 ticket. And that's exactly what I did last year. I made it, I screenshotted it, and I texted it to myself. So I had it in my phone. I was ready to rock and roll. So
okay, so you forgo the backpack and laptop on the day.
Yeah, because if you've never been, unless you're like got a limo set up, you're gonna walk a significant amount of time at some point of the day. And the last thing I want is like my laptop in my bag and carrying it around and all that jazz.
That's good advice for Derby newbies for sure. I have been privately assured, and I don't think I'm supposed to really tell people this, so don't, like, who's ever listening, don't go spreading this around Twitter. But I have been told that participants in the big contest that day, they are going to find some sort of workaround so that they can have laptops in. Because can you imagine the situation without that? I mean, some contest players literally could not function without their machines. And I think if you're putting up 20 dimes, it's only correct that they're going to come up with a workaround for that. If you do end up playing in that contest, would that change your approach, Jonathon? Would you then need your laptop?
Yeah, absolutely. If I play, I'll bring it. My friend Robert's going to probably play, and so either way, I think with my credential, I'm going to bring in a backpack and get his, so I can get his laptop in for him if he's the only one playing. If I happen to be playing as well, then my bag will probably have 2 laptops in it. So.
Yeah, I think, though, if you're playing in the contest and listening, I think they're going to, I pretty much guarantee you, even if it's unofficially, they're going to make sure that that you guys are okay. So we don't want to, I saw some panic on Twitter this morning, and we want to quell that panic. The folks there, they want to take care of the players, and they want that contest to be successful. So I'm sure they're going to bend over backwards to accommodate. All right, so today's show, in a little bit, we're going to bring in a special guest, PH founder, PH being Public Handicapper, founder Scott Carson. He's going to talk to us about the upcoming big contest on publichandicapper.com, the PH Challenge. Well, he's also going to go over the 4 Public Handicapper races for this weekend, which is the final weekend of the PH Prep Contest. But before we get to that, I wanted to get to a question, and this isn't a question that can be answered in a couple of minutes. This is actually going to be a segment on the show, and it came in from a friend of the podcast and general good guy and excellent contest player, Jamal Barnett. And Jamal wanted to hear about how we, the podcast crew, individually prepare for a card of racing, to sort of break down the schedule. In other words, I think when we start looking at the PPs, what our process is for handicapping, to hear a little bit about how often we play. I thought it was a great idea for a show, and I thought maybe we could talk about it here for a few minutes at the beginning of the show today, and then perhaps harken back to some of our preparations and the way we look at races when we're breaking down the specifics of the 4 Public Handicapper races today. So, Michael, we'll start with you. How often do you play, and typically how far in advance are you looking at the races for that day?
Ooh, that's a good question. Well, it's one that's hard to answer outside of the context of my my day job, because with doing the formulator facts and just what I do here at the Daily Racing Forum, I'm always looking at least 2 days out. Sometimes as they're drawn, if they'll draw Wednesday evening for a Saturday card, I might look at it that Wednesday evening for the first time. And I don't know if I'd be doing that if I was not necessarily working at the forum, perhaps, but it might be more like the day before, just because I need to get my information in a couple days in order for it to go into the paper.
So here's my question. I have a follow-up already, which is
sure.
The work. Do you separate the work you're doing for the form, the finding the facts, etc., from the actual handicapping process? In other words, like formulator facts 2 days in advance, is that enough sometimes for you to make a bet, or are you then always going back, or at that time handicapping the whole card and formulating your ideas of what you're going to bet?
Well, sometimes I do it simultaneously. Like, when I pull up the race or the card for the first time, I will go through the field, do my cursory handicapping, then dive in and look for the formulator facts. So I usually, the stuff that I do for the paper isn't necessarily an implied bet. For instance, if there's a positive stat, it doesn't mean that I'm going to be betting that horse or not. It's just like, hey, look, this is interesting, or conversely, yeah. Right, exactly. Conversely, a negative stat. And there's one I'll mention for Middleburg when we discuss that race. Doesn't mean that I think the horse is not going to win or is likely to lose or any of that stuff. It's more just thought-provoking, interesting trends. To some extent, that stuff is divorced a little bit from my handicapping, because for the paper, I have to do the formulator facts, which tend to be very stat-based. My handicapping approach is much less stat-based than what it would appear if you just read my work.
We'll get into that. We'll get into that in the next question.
Sure.
Before Jonathan answers this first question, though, one other little piece of follow-up. You have to write about an awful lot of races during a week. How many races for work are you handicapping a week, and what would you guess the percentage of those races that you actually have a pari-mutuel wager in is?
Ooh, well, what I do every day, I guess it would be not Mondays or Tuesdays racing, but so 5 days a week, Wednesday through Sunday, I'm pulling up the biggest races, which might be 3 to 4 to 6 to 8 races a day, and going through and seeing if I can come up with anything compelling one way or another, either positive or negative, stat-wise, or next race, key race or negative key race-wise, or just any nuggets that I can pull up using Formulator. So that might be on a busy week anywhere from, for the paper, anywhere from 20 to 30 races. On a slower week, it might be maybe half of that. Then separate to that, I'll focus on, in what I do both for the paper and for my own handicapping, is I look at I don't go through a card chronologically. I start with the races that appeal to me most, which are usually the bigger stakes races, or usually things like interesting maiden or allowance races. That's where I start. I try and key an opinion around one of those races and then go out from there to see if I want to put together a bet. So of those, say, 30 races a week, I might be maybe putting a bet in on 1/5 of them, perhaps. I'm not betting every race.
Actually betting on a handful of races a week. Jonathan, how does that differ from your approach in terms of how often you're playing? And obviously with you, we're going to include contests in that as a Texas resident. how often you're playing and how far in advance you're preparing for the days that you do play.
Yeah, so this I can go on for years and years and years about this question. I think
I'll
that
cut
my
you off when it's
normal,
appropriate, don't worry.
right, so Monday through Sunday, I think my schedule typically is on Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday. Monday and Tuesday and Wednesday morning, I'm getting caught up on trip notes. If there's some type of feeder contest Wednesday, Thursday, Friday that I want to participate in, then obviously I'll do the handicapping the day of. I don't work too much in advance because I'm usually trying to get my trip notes done from earlier, on Monday and Tuesday. There's two different schedules I have. If I'm going to be traveling, like I'm going to be heading out of town on Thursday or Friday to travel, I usually leave on Thursdays. Then on Wednesday night, the Saturday PPs are drawn for a tournament I'm probably participating in. Wednesday night, I'm sitting, hitting refresh, waiting for Formulator to post the PPs. I print, and then I mark up my PPs with, just the kind of mindless thought processes that we all have, whether it's, writing in, different numbers that we might have, or different, or circling things that we just circle no matter what when they're there. If it's a slow pace, you circle the face, whatever there is. I do all that mindless work ahead of time.
Pre-handicapping, I call it.
Exactly. So that on Thursday when I'm on my flight, I can start looking through things. This is actually a very interesting point. Like, one of the trickiest parts about traveling a lot is on Thursday when I would like to be watching replays, there's typically not an airline that has Wi-Fi that's strong enough that will stream the video. So that really kind of messes me up sometimes, because I kind of get to a point where I can't handicap in the rate that I would like to.
You're giving your opponent some good information here. Find the contest Jonathon's flying to on a Thursday and attack him aggressively. Look for the $800 head-to-head against Kinchen when he has no Wi-Fi on the flight.
Right. Exactly. So that's kind of a struggle at times. And then Friday and Saturday, I usually try to get going in the mornings to get my handicapping done, because if I'm going to the track on Friday, I'm going to hang out. I'm not going to be working. One of the other things, and I know we'll kind of work around to my actual process of handicapping, but one of the other things that I don't do is I don't handicap at night, because I have found out about myself that when I get tired, I cut corners. When I get tired, I just say like, American Pharaoh can't lose. Whatever, who cares, And then I would miss an opportunity to find F and X running, and so I try to do it when I'm fresh. And so I'll just shut down at night when I have 3 hours of good hours left that I could be handicapping. I don't do it.
You and I have a lot of similarities, Jonathon, and not least of which is that over the years in all my endeavors, whether it's writing columns, writing books, editing manuscripts, or handicapping races, I just know that I have my creative thoughts in the morning, and I sort of build my schedule around that. And I'll do that much more tedious by rote, what we'll call pre-handicapping. That I can do any time of day. But when it comes that I want to sit down and I need my brain to be working creatively, either in writing a bet or coming up with a horse, I want to do that stuff in the morning. So for me, the schedule, it really depends on the time of year. Saratoga being a completely different animal, Breeders' Cup being a different animal. But this time of year for me, Monday and Tuesday, race review days. When PPs come out, when possible, I'll try to do some of the pre-handicapping. I'll get into what I mean by that when we talk a little more in the next question about our handicapping processes. But I like to do the work the morning of. I like to sort of process what happened the day before, certain things I might be tracking, whether it has to do with how the track is, trainers and jockeys that are hot, have all that sort of in the bank, look at the new day fresh in the morning. That's my favorite way. That's my favorite way to approach it. For me, this time of year, in terms of how often I play, haven't been playing very much, dabbled at Keeneland, but didn't do a lot serious. For Belmont, I look to be playing. I'll figure to have a bet every day of the Belmont meeting. So now it is where it really starts to ramp up for me. But let's move on to the next question about the process of handicapping and the things that we're looking at. Now, obviously, you could do a whole show on this, guys, so we don't need to go like crazy in depth. But in terms of when you're handicapping a race, describe that process. Mike, you first.
Oh boy, I just go through quickly go through the race, look at all the contenders, try and get a sense of how I feel the race might possibly be run from a pace standpoint. Is there anything that jumps out at me, either in terms of a legitimate contender or in terms of a likely favorite that seems vulnerable. I just kind of try and get my bearings around what is this race, what are we doing, who are the players, and then from there I go through horse by horse and try and figure out, Jonathon's talked about a little bit of like what's the story of each horse. I kind of try and tell that story of each horse, of how they're coming into the race, what they're likely to be doing from a pace standpoint, what the tactics are going to be, if this is the goal, if this is a prep, and then I'll certainly approach it differently if it's a field of established stakes runners versus if it's a maiden race. If it's a maiden race, I'll dive much more deeply into the pedigrees, and I'll dive much more deeply into the trainer stats that are relevant to specific runners. And if it's more established horses, then I'll do some race replay and chart work to come up with hopefully a good opinion. And if I don't have a strong opinion in the race one way or another, then I'll likely pass.
It's a good point you make, Mike, that it's not a cookie-cutter situation. How you look at 2-year-olds going 6 furlongs on the dirt is a completely different animal than, not literally, but a completely different animal in theory to 4 and up going 12 furlongs on the grass, and that's something that makes it hard to answer this question in any kind of pithy way. Jonathon, for you, when people, I'm sure you get asked all the time about your handicapping process, what do you tell people?
Yeah, I think that, there's been, first off, I changed stuff, like literally I added something new this week that I wasn't doing last week. So that's one of the things I do is I add things, I drop things, I change, I try to adjust, and I think that's been very beneficial because I've picked up some really good stuff and I've dropped some things that were a waste of time. And so I think the first thing that I do is, like I said, I do all my pre-work. If there's, there's certain things we all like to do, there's certain numbers we like to add or we're interested in or curious about, I'll write those numbers in. I'll circle things, like I said, that are important to me. But then my process really starts with I identify how the pace is going to unfold. And so what I'll do is I'll kind of mock up, like just really quickly, I'll mock up like in which order I think the pace is going to go. Like I'll say the 5's going to be first, the 2's going to be second, the 4's going to be third, so on and so forth. And then this is something I added, right before the first NHC that I participated in. I handicap from front to back. I don't handicap, in post position order. I handicap or favorite order or whatever. I handicap from front to back. So I'll start with who I think is going to be on the lead, and then the last horse I handicap in the race will be the horse that should be last early. He'll be closing. And what I found that does is it really tells the story of the race in a way that you can actually visualize it, and it's been tremendous for me. And so, because sometimes what will happen is the one horse will be a closer, you'll fall in love with him, and then you'll fall in love with the horse because he's the first one you looked at, and then you don't realize that there's no speed in the race. And so I just like to I do it in that order because I think that the speed and pace is the most important thing. And then, like Mike said, I started. Oh, go ahead.
Let me interrupt you just with a question of, I totally get that handicapping front to back for dirt racing. I feel like it sort of mirrors the inherent bias in all dirt racing, which clearly favors horses who are on the lead. Do you do it in turf racing too, and do you find it just as effective in turf racing as you do on the dirt?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we all know that turf is a trip race, and whoever gets the best trip typically in turf races does well. Horses that are near or on the lead are typically going to get better paces than horses that are coming from off. Turf races don't typically collapse and fall apart because there's typically not 3 or 4 speeds in there. And I always joke with all my friends, if I ever claim a horse, I'm gonna claim horses and put them on the front end on turf races. So it's
Mike Mitchell and Phil D'Amato have shown that can work pretty well.
Exactly. So it doesn't make a difference to me either way, whatever the surface is, the distance, the trip,
gotcha.
Anything. And then
I interrupted you there as you were continuing with your review of the process.
The other thing that I like to do is I like to start at the bottom of the running lines, the PPs, and work my way up. And then and Mike and I have talked about this before, and I literally will tell a story as I'm going. Okay, debuted in August in a stakes race as a 2-year-old, ran 4th. Then they shipped him to Indiana. Now he's at Keeneland. And I tell the story all the way up. And by the time you get to the top, you'll be amazed at how you know exactly why this horse is in this spot. And so that's one of the things that I do as well. And in the process of that, you'll find reasons to dig into formulator, because now when you get to the top, you see they're cutting the horse back. Now I want to know how Mike Maker does cutting horses back, so on and so forth. And then when I'm done with all of that for all the horses, then I dive into the workout reports, watch any replays that I feel like I need to look at that I didn't look at prior, and that's the quick version of kind of how I do it.
And you're somebody who also, we've talked about, brings in other information too. At what point in the process are you interested in hearing the opinions of your other friends who are aficionados on the different circuits, and how much will what you hear from them change what you've done on your own?
For instance, like that's happened twice today already. I'm looking at Belmont today. So if I'm being really lazy, I'll look at my buddy Nick Tamaro's selections on Naira before, but typically I'll handicap the race first, and then I'll look at like Nick's opinion and read kind of what he said, and maybe he'll send me back to look at something that I didn't look at first, or he'll confirm an opinion for me. This morning I was looking at the last race at Keeneland, and it's a complete confusion. So I texted our buddy Mike Maloney and said, Mike, anything in the last? And he didn't have any opinions, but pointed out that Gary Stevens was on a first-time starter, something that I noticed, and now him noticing it makes me feel better about it. So, that's kind of how I'll do it after the fact.
No, that's smart. I mean, it's one of the hardest things for a lot of novice players, I think, is to be able to incorporate information from big bettors, and people whose opinions you really respect, without it sort of compromising what you do on your own, and still having the confidence in the work that you've done and your own opinion to not be overly swayed by those times when maybe you really like a horse, but say Nick has a very different opinion in the race. Has that ever been a problem for you? What advice would you give to people who are trying to learn to integrate that stuff without just being lazy and going with what the other person thinks?
Yeah, what's funny is in this last 2 years, I've gotten to meet so many people in the industry. It's something that you've been a part of. We've all been a part of it. And I consider them kind of in the same thing. When you get inside information, or you get information, so-and-so likes their horse today because someone's friends with the groom who's friends with the groom's uncle, whatever. We all have seen that. It's all happened. And there's a lot of times where that information
I've heard farrier tips. At points I've heard farrier tips, Jonathan. Beware the farrier tip.
Right, exactly. And sometimes that information's good. We heard yesterday that the 3 was ready to rock and roll at Keeneland in that 2-year-old race where he was the second choice, and it was a Ben Colebrook horse. And then I had a buddy text me that Colebrook had a suit on. So it's like you get that information, and you have to process it as you will. What I've learned, and the rule that I've developed over the last 2 years, is you can use information and others' opinion to upgrade horses. Don't use it to downgrade horses that you like. You know what I mean? You got to play what you like. And if you like a horse, don't let the farrier doesn't like the horse take you off the horse. You know what I mean?
That's great. Well, I want to get Scott in here, and I want to talk about these races, so I'm not going to go on too long. I realize this is a topic, and I think Jamal had originally asked this question thinking it could be a whole show, and I think he's right. I think we'll return to these kind of to this type of discussion at a future time on the podcast. But for now, I'm just going to echo the same thing that Mike and Jonathan said that they do first. I also do first. It's a cliche, but it's one of those cliches that's a cliche for a reason. 2 of the smartest people I know in the game, both of whom have backgrounds, one for IBM, another was and is a professional statistician, and they both did giant statistical studies about sort of what in handicapping is true and what time-honored ideas are true, which ones are false. They both came up with that the biggest truism is that pace makes the race. And so I think that's why, you guys want to start with that question. That's why I want to start with it. I think what Jonathan said was great about physically even making a drawing of what the race is going to look like at the half-mile pole. In terms of tools to do that, if you're a newer player, if you're looking at dirt races, certainly the Moss pace figures can give you an example of that. You could even use raw fractions if you're looking at horses on the same circuit. Granted, it can be weird because of run-ups and running at different distances, but just to give you a really quick and dirty idea, you could even use raw fractions. And then there's other sources for turf races. There's other sources of pace figures, or I even encourage people to make their own pace figures. Jim Quinn has a great book about figure making, the Buyer books. You can use the same methodology he espouses in there to make pace figures. It's going to really help you get an understanding of how races unfold, and for me, that's where things start. I love what Jonathon said about the sort of narrative approach, starting from the beginning. I think that's invaluable. There's a couple of examples of that we'll get to today. And then Jonathon gave those couple of examples of looking at the world a little bit differently by going in a different order than most people go with things. One thing I'll say particularly for contest players is I like to start a card from the last race and move it back towards the first place, especially in a contest situation where that last race can, almost always takes on this outsized importance, where that's the race you really have to get right. So I love to know before the day even starts in that last race, if I just need a winner, this is the horse I want. If I need a mid-range, this is the horse I want. If I need a bomb, this is the horse I want. I like to have that figured out. I figure while it's really important to handicap the early races of a card too, especially if you're trying to incorporate some real-time bias information into your work, in a lot of situations, especially in a contest, it's so important to it's much easier to fake it early and have things nailed down late. So that's another little technique that I use. So there, Jamal, I hope we gave you some food for thought and some stuff that's useful to you. Feel free to ask any follow-up questions, and we will use this info on another show at some point. And again, we'll try to refer back to some of this stuff as we're going over these races. But now I want to bring in our special guest. He's a friend of the podcast. He's a listener to the podcast. He many times has made excellent suggestions, including just 2 weeks ago when it was his idea to do that little pick recap after we go through the 4 PH races. He's the founder of PublicHandicapper.com. He is Scott Carson. Scott, welcome to the DRF Players Podcast.
Well, thanks, Pete. It's great to be here, as always.
Now, we're not having you here just to talk about the races today. I want sort of a state of the union on what's going on the Public Handicapper site, because I know this is a critical time of year with one contest ending and another one about to begin. Is there going to be any drama in the last weekend of the Public Handicapper prep this weekend?
Well, I don't think there's going to be much drama unless we get a couple of cappers. The guy who's leading is Newcomb, K-N-E-W-C-O-M-B. He's got a $50 lead, and he's just been awesome the entire contest. He's been hitting. He hasn't even hit a capper. He's hit a number of 20+to-1 horses, and he's been doing it on an equal basis. He didn't just get hot. He's been hot the whole contest. So I think he's probably going to win, and he's going for that $1K $1,000 prize, and then the second place prize is a T-shirt. So you really want to win the contest.
Scott, what are you doing? Prep. You must not like this guy. You trying to mush him or something? He's already won. We got 4 races left. Anything could happen.
That's true. It's entirely possible, but it's not that often that we get somebody who's dominating that much. We don't get $50 leads going into the last day. If it was Breeders' Cup Day, that'd be a little different because you're going to have 9 races where there's going to be 1 or 2 cappers most likely. But the races this week, they don't look that crazy. So I'd have my money on him.
All right, we'll get to that. We'll get to the races this week in a minute, but let's look ahead to next weekend. You mentioned the Breeders' Cup races, which are so important to the end of the Public Handicapper Challenge. That's where this contest ends. It begins on Oaks Day. Tell our listeners, some of whom may not know, they may be new listeners, what the deal is with the PH Challenge and why they should all be playing in it.
All right, so you want to be playing the PH Challenge, first of all. There are 2 seats to the NHC, and perhaps even more important, even if you don't win, you can get a lot of valuable tour points. Because we have so many people playing in the contest, we have over 2,300 NHC Tour players who are active on PH right now, and we'll probably get more, in the next week or so. And even last year, I finished 70th or something in the PH Challenge. I mean, I'm not even really officially in the challenge, but the editors do count. They are in the standings. So we never kind of expect to win it, but I finished 70th, and I got over 2,000 tour points. and I ended up getting into the NHC based on tour points. So I would encourage all NHC tour players to not only play, but play throughout the year. At least get the minimum 65 races in, because you do have, in order to be eligible for the tour points, you do have to play those 65 races. Otherwise, you are DQ'd and ineligible for tour points.
I just want to underline also what Scott said about the PH Challenge. This is a chance to win your way into the NHC, where if you're like Paul Matisse and end up winning the whole thing, you can win over $800,000, and you can top that up by betting yourself to win in the sports book downstairs and walking with another cool 10 dimes, but that's besides the point. But you can win hundreds of thousands of dollars in this contest. You can answer for free. If you're a horse player, if you're going to be looking at races this weekend anyway, if you're listening to the show, if you like to hear people sitting around talking about races, why not just handicap them yourself and go ahead and put in picks on PH and join along in the fun. And I also want to point out that even for the PH Challenge, it's not too late to start. And the reason I say that is because in all the Public Handicapper contests, it's not just about the contest itself. There are also monthly prizes and weekly prizes. So if you go on there this weekend and you happen to pick the 4 winners in these 4 races, do you know what the weekly prize is these days, Scott?
Yeah, you get a 10 card. You get 10 cards of Formulator PPs.
That ain't bad for a free roll. Yeah, that's
not bad.
Fantastic. Yeah. So there's a lot of different reasons to play in this contest. We structure our podcast around it. So we really wanted to bring Scott on and just underline this is the time of year. Don't forget, it starts on Oaks Day. We'll mention again on the Thursday podcast. We're doing a Thursday show next week because of when the races are drawing and Jonathan's travel plans. We'll highlight it again then, but put it on your calendar now. Make a note. You want to be part of the Public Handicapper Challenge. Yes, you can get in if you don't start from the beginning, but Oaks Day, an exciting day of racing. Why don't you just get right in for the beginning and give yourself a chance? Anything else we should underline about the PH Challenge, Scott, before we move on to this weekend's races?
Yeah. One thing that I want to point out, one of the great things about Public Handicapper is that it's 6 months long. I mean, so it's really, it is like the Belmont Stakes of handicapping contests. It's the test of the champion. But, that intimidates some people because they're like, oh, man, I don't have time. I'm going to, I play all these other contests, or I have like wife and kids, or, or husband and kids, and so on. And you don't actually have to play every race. We play over 100 races, but you only have to play a minimum of 65. So you can take a few weeks off, but, and still be eligible to win. The only, the mandatories are the Breeders' Cup races. So, so even if you don't get a chance to start, or if you do get a chance to start and you're going to miss a few weeks, that's not a big deal. You're still going to be eligible to win. You just got to get that 65 minimum in there.
And while we're talking about it, we've been talking on the show a lot about process. It's sort of questions a little more geared maybe to a novice type player. Another thing that Public Handicapper offers you the chance to do is to actually be a public handicapper and write your own analyses of races and also read other people's analyses of races. And I feel like that's just an invaluable learning tool. There's something, for me anyway, when I started writing about races back in, I guess it was the year 2000, writing for the Saratoga Special, it really does help crystallize your thoughts when you put them down on paper. And I think that's the case for a lot of people. And then there's also just a chance, there are not that many people offer analyses, Scott, but are there people on there who you always want to check out what they have to say?
It's interesting. Sometimes I look at the races and I have really strong opinions right from the get-go. So I don't look at anybody's analysis because I don't want to change my mind. I want to send those picks in. There are other times when I look and I'm completely perplexed, and then I will actually, look at each of the editors because they each have their own angles. And then I'll also click through, you can go onto the PH odds page, and once you click on one person's analysis, you can just hit next analysis, next, and see what people think. And sometimes you don't get great opinions, but other times you get like a little nugget, like somebody says, "Hey, this horse is working faster than it's ever worked," and you're like, "Oh, how did I miss that?" Right? And it can give you a little bit of an edge.
harkens back to something Jonathan was saying before you came on the show, Scott, about the right way to incorporate other people's info. Should also mention, folks listening to the show probably heard Chris Larmy on our last edition of the show. He's in our little intra-show derby competition. Chris is, along with Scott, one of the editors, frequently posts his analysis, and that guy comes up with some pretty cool horses. He's good at finding the long shots, that Larmy.
Absolutely.
All right, let's dive into these races. We got a little less time than usual, but we're going to make it work. We're going to start off. We're going to do the 2 Gulfstream races first, guys, because that's the order that I have my PPs in. I hope you don't mind. I think technically that's going out of post-position order. But we're going to start with the Miami Mile. And Scott, as our guest, we're going to start off with you.
Okay. Well, whenever there's 4 races every week, and I usually find one kind of low-priced horse per week that I end up going with. So I'm usually looking for value, but it's a long contest, and sometimes chalk does come in. This horse is 5-to-1 morning line, but is getting pounded on PH. So I don't know if he's going to go off favored or not, but I am with Smoke'em Kitten, who
I like.
Is just kind of broke out in his last race for Michael Maker, who's been treating me right on PH so far, it's a low weight. It's only 117 pounds. Had a blowout race, last race won by 4 or 5 lengths, and just looks right. It looks like he's coming into his own. So, if we get 3-to-1, I'll be ecstatic. But it's currently 8-to-5 on Public Handicapper. So,
Explain what you mean by that. Explain what you mean by that, Scott, for folks who might not be familiar with the little sort of mini parimutuel system that Public Handicapper provides folks.
Well, as we know, sometimes morning lines are way off, and so you can't really trust them. And I have another horse later that's morning line seems to be way off. So I like to go to Public Handicapper. If you go to the odds page, there's a button for odds, and it's a pretty popular page, but maybe it's not used as much as it should be. And you'll see, everybody. They aren't weighted picks. Everybody only gets 1 pick per race, but the odds turn out to be very similar sometimes to the actual odds. And even for the Kentucky Derby, we put up the picks early, and sometimes you can see a day before the public knows what horse is getting steam. Some horse will be 6-to-1 that you're like, what? That was a 15-to-1 morning line. So if you go to the odds page, that will give you an idea. Sometimes I look at a horse and I say, well, that horse doesn't look like 12-to-1. Let me see on PH what they're doing on PH. And sometimes the horse will be 5-to-1 on PH, and you're like, yeah, that's more like it. Like that's probably what the horse is going to be like. Or it may be getting ignored on PH, so you're like, hey, well, maybe it is going to go off of a price. So if you're making your picks way in advance, which we often are on Public Handicapper, that can help you to land on a price horse.
Mike, you said you had a stat about this race, about the presumable favorite Middleburg. What was that stat, and what's your thought on this race?
Well, my stat on Middleburg is Christophe Clement, who of course does fantastic off layoffs, does fantastic with turf routers and graded stakes. It's worth noting that he's only 1 for 15 with only 1 second and 2/3 97-cent ROI past 5 years in turf route graded stakes following a layoff of 180 days or more. Often when he gets these ones from Europe or from wherever, even his own runners that he's returning from a long layoff, he puts them back in listed stakes or allowance races or other types of races. And the fact that this one, I think, is probably just because he's out of conditions. Middleburg needs to start somewhere this year and is showing up here. I think he's going to be overbet because of it. Look, he can win, but many of these runners, he's missed with runners that were 8-to-5. A lot of them were 5-to-1 or less. I think he's going to need a race, and at a short price, I'm looking to beat him. However, I'm looking to beat him with the same horse that Scott likes, who I think is going to be bet down from that 5-to-1 morning line. But I think he's the one who hasn't really been exposed. We haven't seen the best of him. The 2 poor efforts you can certainly excuse. One was followed by a year layoff, and then the other one, if you haven't watched the race, his return race, February 14th at Gulfstream, watch that race because it's kind of my trip race of the year. I tweeted out my trip notes for it, and it just says Mr. Toad's Wild Ride was a smoother trip than that one. But because of that, I was all over him in that last race at Gulfstream where he won easily. I think there's a lot of upside to him. He beat a good field in that race, even though there are no next out winners. One of the things I like to do in Formulator that we've mentioned before is look at the buyer figure view of the runners that have run back from that race. I think we've got 7 that have run. 6 of them improved their buyer figures off the effort. So it was a sneaky good win where he crushed a field and is now moving back into graded stakes company. I think he's a legitimate player.
All right, guys, we're going to have to pick up
record there.
Oh, there you go. We're going to have to pick up the pace here a little bit. I realize it we just trying to stuff a lot of stuff in today's show, and we got a little bit of a late start, unfortunately. But Jonathon, what are your thoughts in the Miami Mile?
Conquest Tsunami, wire to wire.
You took the words. You took the words right out of my mouth. Are you worried? The only thing I was thinking of was maybe this Hothersal, the 4, coming out of those sprints. Is he going to be closer and give us a hard time on the front end, or do you think Conquest Tsunami is loose?
No, I think he's a sprinter. So I think he's going to be. I think he's actually faster than the 4. One of the things that you got to keep in mind about South Florida is they beat that turf course up all year long. And then I don't want to say all the good horses, but all of the classier horses leave, and it's just beat down. It's like running on a carpet. He's going to wire him, and he won't be 12-1 either. I think he'll come down from that.
That's probably a good guess. All right, so just to do our little recap, for Scott and for Mike, it's number 2, Smoke'em Kitten. For Jonathon and for me, it's number 1, Conquest Tsunami. We will move on to the other Gulfstream turf race. This one's for fillies and mares. It's also a mile on the turf. Mike, we'll start with you in the powder break.
Well, I'm going to take another 5-1 morning line horse, which is number 6, Daring Kathy. She was one of the favorites in the last start when Speed Seeker ran off. She had no chance to close into that one. She went strangely wide on the first turn, kind of bore out on the first turn. I think she's ready in the third start off of a bit of a layoff, back with David Fox now. She's a good price, and I think she's going to have more speed to set her up, and I don't think we're going to see a runoff like we had last time with Speed Seeker.
I thought that Daring Kathy wants to be speed. That's interesting that you say you think she wants to come off.
I think, yeah, I mean, she has been forwardly placed. I think I don't know if she is a need the lead type. I think she's probably going to sit in the, second or third, right in the second flight, and then pounce on the speed, which is what she tried to do in the last race, and unfortunately nobody really went with Speed Seeker, and she never stopped. So I kind of see her getting back to the way she won at Belmont, where she was sitting, second, or even back in Gulfstream in 2014, where she's sitting second and then just runs by the speed late.
Scott, you agreed with Mike in the first of the Gulfstream races, or Mike agreed with you more accurately. Do you agree with him here?
No, not at all. In fact, I hate the speed horse. There's so much speed here. It's blowing my mind. And Daring Kathy has wired 4 of her 6 wins are wire jobs. So I think she might sit second. But somebody's got to be second. There's a lot of horses going for the lead. So I am all over Susie B, who is, I believe, another Mike Maker horse. And
you do love Maker.
Mm-hmm.
I do. Well, I had Smaverless, with Mike Maker 20-1 on PH. So I've been inclined toward him for a while. But this horse is third off a layoff. It ran at Houston 4 wide all the way around off a layoff. And then it went to Fairgrounds and ran at a pretty solid stakes, got 4th. And now it's third off the layoff. It gets Edgar Prado back. Prado won on the horse twice already. And I think he's just going to sit. He's going to sit nicely way back have a rail trip, and then I don't know what he'll do at the end. I don't know if Prado will go try to go through the inside or go around, but I think either way he's going to be like a slingshot. The horse is 12-1 morning line, and it looks like it's around that price on PH. So that's my pick.
You can't call horses it, Scott. These are fillies and mares. You got to use she. Get your pronouns right.
Okay. I understand that. Yeah. Okay. She. Susie B. all the way.
All right. I see the race a lot closer to the way Scott does than the way Mike does. I thought the best closer in the race was number 7, EB Rider, and that is where my money is going to go. Jonathan, where do you end up here?
Yeah, no, Pete, you know this more than anyone. I'll take speed of the speed. I don't care how much speed is in there if I think that it will work. The negative part is when there's a lot of speed and one of them is really good, it guts the rest of them because they end up running earlier than they have to. And I think Cali 37 is actually really good. So I think she's going to gut the rest of them, and I think she's going to set it up really good for Note de Oro, second off the break for second time Clement. I just, leaving this horse down here, it feels like that's something they've had in mind. If you look at some of her back races, it just makes sense. I think she'll run by them all late. I actually think it'll be kind of convincing in the end.
All right, with 4 different opinions there, hopefully we come up with the winner in the powder break. Let's turn our attention up north to Belmont Park and the elusive quality, 7 furlongs for 4-year-olds and up. Jonathan, we'll keep it with you.
What a cool race. I don't know. I'm going to default give 2 picks, and you guys can be mad at me. That's fine. I like Green Mask. I think Green Mask is a grade 1 type sprinter. I think that the 7 is something that they don't really have an opportunity to do very often. If you look through his PPs, you can see 5.5, 6, 6.5 mile, and the last time he went 7 at Belmont, he won, and I think it was actually this race, maybe. It was a stake for $100,000 stake around the same time. But one of the horses I'm really interested in, I've always thought he would be a lot better if he could go a little bit shorter, is a lot. And I think cutting back, switching to Chad Brown, not that there's much of a difference between Chad Brown and Bill Mott, in terms of what you can expect from a trainer switch like that. But I've always thought A Lot was a really good horse, and I think the cutback might hit him right between the eyes, and he's a little bit better value than Green Mask.
All right, for me, even though I do want to keep things moving, I have to tell a little story here because there's a good example of what we talk about when we're looking at stories in the PPs, I think. So I have a note in Formulator from King Crease's first start of the year last year, back in that April 29th race, and I didn't credit it in my note, but I think I picked this up probably from Maggie Wolfendale because I was not in the paddock that day. But I had a note that he didn't appear fully fit and would probably need the race. Makes me think it's, not crazy. Coming back in the same race, the successful campaign he had last year might be the same situation. So a little bit of trepidation about number 2, King Crease. On the other hand, looking at the comeback efforts off the bench of number 8, Carafa, here's a horse who's fired very fresh and done very well off the bench. April 19th of Keeneland last year, posting the 100 buyer speed figure, coming back from the considerably shorter freshening in the fall, also won. I'm going to go with Carafa here, number 8, and I'm just going to leave it there. Mike, what is your thought on the elusive quality?
Well, it's interesting because I think Green Mask is a legitimate player, at least probably the best sprinter. I think you're right, Pete, that King Creasa and arguably Carafa as well probably want more ground. And so in terms of the sprinters, Green Mask is the most accomplished. But I wonder, again, going back to that story, Green Mask is coming off of a layoff, last raced in December in Hong Kong, had been working at Keeneland, and then strangely shows up at Belmont. If they had had this race in mind for him, I'm wondering why he was at Keeneland for his return workouts. I'm wondering if maybe they tried to get a race in there. It either didn't fill or he wasn't quite ready. Now they call an audible. He shows up here. He could win, but I don't think I want him at a short price. So the one that I like in here is number 4, Bye Bye Bernie. Second off of a long layoff. He's won on the turf sprinting. I think he had no chance closing into that pace last out in Shakertown. Actually ran on pretty well. I think he'll be better in the second start this year, and I think you'll have some pace to run out. So I'm going with number 4, Bye Bye Bernie.
Scott, who is it for you in the elusive quality?
This is probably the toughest race of the day for me, but I'm going to go with Mosler, who won this race last year off a shorter layoff. And, this is a longer layoff, but he had a bullet at Payson March 22nd, 1 out of 37. His works look really solid. He's 6-1 morning line. He's my pick.
I had a funny note in Formulator from when he won this race a year ago, and I'm glad I just reread. It says, Mosler knocked me out of the pick 4. I should have trusted Bill Mott. And trusted Bill Mott. Will Scott here. So number 4, Mosler's his pick. Mike going with number 4, Bye Bye Bernie. I took number 8, Carafa. And Jonathan is hemming and hawing between number 5, Green Mask, and number 3, A Lot. I realized I didn't do the recap in the powder break. Mike there had number 6, Daring Kathy. Scott, number 9, Susie B. I went with number 7, E.B. Ryder. And Jonathan went with number 5, Note Doro. If we don't have one winner out of those 2 races, guys, we may have to hand in our handicapper half-ass wise guy cards or something, but because we've got 8 horses for 2 races, we gotta get some love in there. Last race we're going to talk about is the San Francisco Mile out at Golden Gate. Their turf festival's been fun to pay attention to. Our friend of the podcast, Tom Quigley's been out there doing a good job. Why don't we start this one once again with Mike? Who's going to win here?
Kenji Storm, or at least he's the play. I think I can excuse the last 2 races. He's got some early speed. I think this race sets up a lot better for him than it did in the Kilroe Mile, where he was 35-1 and never able to get to the top against horses like What a View and Bolo. He's facing some good ones here, but not quite as good. Last out, I don't think he wanted to go nearly 2 miles. So I think he's an interesting one, and anything close to the 20-1 is attractive, but I don't know if we're even going to get that.
For me, it's a horse for course number 7, GG Rider, with some of the more obvious favorites stuck on the outside. I'm hoping that this one can get a good trip and get it done at a halfway decent price. Scott, where are you here?
I'm really strongly liking Montego Bay here. He's a 12-1 morning line. He's got a nice post. Drayden Van Dyke travels up with him. For Neil Drysdale, who's not hitting at a very high percentage, but the horse ran a good race here last year, and he said he's 12-1 morning line. He is showing up on Public Handicapper as 5-1, so he is kind of getting crushed there. But I would take him at 5-1. Nice post. I'm down with Montego Bay.
Jonathan, are you with the 3 of us trying to go against with who I think the 3 obvious horses are on the outside here, or are you going to go with one of them?
Well, I like Kenji Storm too a lot. So like Mike said, I think he made all the good points. The horse fits on his mile races. They tried to run him long a few times. It didn't work out well. But I think he's actually a top quality horse. I like him a lot. My biggest opinion in this race is I am completely against Bala Bali. That horse gets bet every time and runs. He works well, has huge workout report stuff from Southern California, never runs well. I do like Gabriel Charles. I think it's interesting that Mike shows up. Gabriel Charles has run twice, run really well off of a break. It looks like Jeff Mullins has been pointing him to this race. So just to not pick the same horse as Mike, like I said, I do like Kenji Storm. I'll go with Gabriel Charles.
I can't wait to get done with the podcast and tweet to our mutual friend, Andrea Mandela, how Bala Bali hasn't run well in his last 3 races where he's been great at stakes placed.
He's supposed to win. He's supposed to win based on the money he gets, and the love he gets in the morning. He's supposed to win those races. So don't do that, Pete.
I'm not going to tweet Andrea. Don't worry. But that was Scott's other excellent constructive criticism of the show from Keeneland, the one where I was getting chased around by security guards. He was like, "You guys were a little staid. It's better when you give each other the business a little bit." So I've taken that role on myself in the last 2 shows. I hope you guys know I'm just having fun. But all right, so for the last race. I'm just going to call you Kenji Storm, Jonathan. Kenji Storm number 3 for Jonathan and Mike with a extra little vote for multi-race play for Jonathan for number 13, Gabriel Charles. For me, it was number 7, Gigi Ryder, and for Scott, number 5, Montego Bay. Gentlemen, any closing thoughts before I send us home?
Well, I'd like to just mention, since Mike thinks he's not going to get 20-1 on Kenji Storm, he's 43-1 on PH right now. So
I saw that. Yeah.
May get that 20-1.
Even better.
Unless a lot of people listen to the podcast and hear you and Jonathon Kinchen are on it, maybe the crush comes in.
12-1 at best. 12-1 at best after that steam gets out there.
That's 9 picks out of 466 that are in right now. 9 people out of 466. So
that's right.
Pretty funny.
Yeah.
All right, next week, very exciting week on DRF.com. We've got a lot of cool stuff going on. We're going to have a lot of coverage from our crack team from Churchill Downs. There's going to be a lot of great stuff to read from the likes of Marty McGee, Jay Privman, all kinds of terrific stuff coming on in advance of the Derby. Going to be workout reports to read. Later in the week, we have a Kentucky Derby seminar, or webinar, I should say, me and Mike talking to both Andy Beyer and Steve Christ, which I think is going to be fun. We're going to have podcasts for you a little bit later. We're going to do a Thursday show or Wednesday show. What do we say? Well, I think I said it wrong before. We're going to do Wednesday and Thursday, right?
Right.
Sounds right.
Is that what we decided? So look for the show. You can look for the shows pretty much regular time on Wednesday, and then we're going to do early to get out of the Oaks Day craziness. I want to thank Scott Carson for joining us. Remember to get ready to play in the Public Handicapper Challenge next week. I want to thank Mike Hogan and Jonathon Kinchen, as always. Most of all, I want to thank all of you, and if you're playing this weekend, may you win all your photos.